a short PowerPoint presentation. So just so you know, don't feel like you have to take notes. Don't feel like you have to remember everything that you're seeing on the screen or that I'm saying. We'll put up the recording and the slides onto our Affordable Housing Task Force website. So don't worry about that. Okay, so these are objectives for the evening. First of all, to introduce our task force. Here are our names. I'm not going to take the time for everyone to introduce themselves just in the interest of time, but we will all be split up into the various breakout rooms, so you'll be able to meet us later. And then what's the issue with housing? Why was our task force established? And finally, as Tiffany mentioned, the real focus of tonight is to gather input from you, input from the community to guide our work. So let's start with the definition so we're all on the same page. This is the rule of thumb that policymakers use when they talk about whether housing is affordable. Housing is considered affordable if no more than 30% of a family's income is going toward housing. And this is the time when I see people calculating in their head, like, is my housing affordable? But it seems like a reasonable proposition, right? So what's the problem? Well, here's a little bit of a sense of the problem in case you haven't seen some of the sort of screaming headlines over the last few years. We are in the midst of a major housing affordability crisis in our country and in our region. Housing prices have just been going up more quickly than wages, and that's led to a growing gap in housing affordability. And unfortunately, Dobbs Ferry and Westchester is just not immune from that trend. So what has caused this? We could spend all night debating and talking about what has caused this, and we're not going to do that, again, in the interest of time. But in the very simplest of terms, it's really a mismatch between supply and demand, especially in regions like ours, where there are good jobs located here and a lot of people want to live here. So the housing supply has just not been increasing quickly enough to keep up with the growing demand for a variety of reasons. So some of the solutions to this kind of issue probably will need to come outside of Dobbs Ferry, maybe from the federal government, from state government. And there are things that federal and state government can do. New York is a little bit, I personally think, a little bit behind of some other states in our area, but hopefully that will be coming along. But there actually are a lot of things that localities can do to address this, and that's going to be the focus of our task force. What can we do here in Dobbs Ferry? I like to think of it a little bit like we think about climate change. If one town, like just Dobbs Ferry, were doing things to address climate change, it wouldn't make maybe such a big impact if Hastings and Irvington and Ardsley were not doing a thing. But we all have to do our part to address it. So that's a little bit of the way to think about it. Another thing to keep in mind is with land use, localities actually do have a lot of power. So there really are things that a place like Dobbs Ferry can do. Okay. So why should those of us who already live in Dobbs Ferry care about any of this, right? We live here. It's fine. I can afford my house maybe. So I'm fine. Why should we care about this? Well, the reason is high housing costs impact people who live here in addition to the people who can't live here. They impact us in lots of ways. And I like to sort of group these things into two buckets. To me, the first bucket is sort of a values bucket. What do we want? And the second is just sort of practical and economic things. So let's talk about the first bucket, the values bucket. What do we want our village to feel like? Does it reflect our values as a community? Do we care about things like diversity and equity? Do we care that we live in a place that has room for seniors, as the mayor was mentioning, in our recent grads, single parents? Do we care about all those things? And the second bucket, let's say we don't care about any of that. We don't care about the values. The second bucket are really practical and economic impacts that high housing costs can have on a community. So these are just a few. One is actually increased traffic. It may not be intuitive, but if people who work in Dobbs Ferry can't afford to live here or anywhere near here. They have to drive. They end up with long commutes. They're driving. That leads to more traffic, more pollution, environment. It also adds to their costs, right? People who need to move farther and farther upstate in order to afford some place to live, they may think they're saving money, like, oh, my house will be cheaper, my housing will be cheaper. But now they're just adding to their transportation costs. Another traffic impact, which is interesting, is studies have actually found that communities that are skewed much more heavily to only high-income people have more cars and they drive more. And it turns out that lower and middle income people use transit more, they bike, they walk. So again, that impacts traffic, that impacts our environment. Another impact is on local employers. Our local employers need workers at all wage levels who can get to their jobs. So it impacts their ability to hire the people they need. And then finally in this economic bucket is think about people who are cost burdened, people who are spending way more than that 30% of their income on housing. Well, they have a lot less money left over to spend on everything else, to spend at our businesses, to maybe go out to dinner once in a while, things like that. So that affects our local businesses and it affects our economy. So given all of this, Westchester County has been aware of this issue, obviously, for a while, and they embarked on an assessment to provide data and to make the case that this is a problem for the entire county. It's something the entire county needs to be thinking about. And this is called the Westchester County Housing Needs Assessment. It came out in November of 2019. So keep in mind this is pre-pandemic. But they looked at things like housing burden, housing conditions, housing needs. And they also put together little sections for each locality, so including Dobbs Ferry, setting forth all the data. So if you're the kind of person who loves looking at numbers and data, like I am, take a look. We have a link to this on our website in addition to the Dobbs Ferry snapshot, and you'll find all the data to keep you happy for hours. And I'll be going into some of that data tonight. So here are sort of the top line findings from that Westchester County Housing Needs Assessment. The finding was that Westchester needs an additional 11,700 housing units in the county. Also, if you look at that bottom line, 41.4% of households in Westchester were paying more than that 30% of housing, that 30% of their income toward housing that we talked about. There was a news conference in 2019 announcing the results. And at that news conference, County Executive George Latimer said, quote, "This is a crisis in every corner of this county." So now let's look a little bit at the data from Dobbs Ferry. Here are some of the findings. Here in Dobbs Ferry, at the time of this report, 32.7% of households were paying more than that 30% of their income towards housing. Additionally, 14.5% were living in what are considered severely cost-burdened housing, which means they're paying more than 50% of their income toward housing. There were 30 housing units that are considered substandard. That means they lack complete plumbing or kitchen facilities. And 85 housing units in Dobbs Ferry are severely overcrowded. As you can see, people always ask, what about the other towns? You can see I just have some numbers showing you some of the results from some of our neighbors. So I think we probably can all agree this is not where we want to be. So what can we do? Just a little bit more data for your interest. Dobbs Ferry is roughly 62% owner-occupied housing and 38% renter-occupied housing. That's actually pretty close to the county average. You can see how the median sales price of a single-family home has gone up. Again, this is a few years old. The bottom line shows the median monthly rent, and that has gone up by a whopping 43.5% in Dobbs Ferry. Just for comparison, during the same period, the Westchester County median rent went up by 19.6%. So as I said, Dobbs Ferry is just not immune to this issue. So how do we address this? One thing that folks who work in this area like to think about is the housing continuum. There's lots of different examples of this. This is one example of a housing continuum graphic. You don't have to spend too much time reading the fine print. But the idea is we want to have a full spectrum of different types of housing. And a healthy housing market will have plenty of options and a sufficient supply sort of all along this continuum. So when it comes to the affordability crisis that we're in now, policymakers really talk about two main avenues to address this. So the first, we can think about increasing the supply of housing that's regulated and set aside and designed to be affordable, set aside for households with a certain income, and regulated and set aside by a government entity. And that we kind of, as a shorthand, we call that capital AH, affordable housing. Mostly, if you look at this little continuum, will fall in that orange area, which is affordable, capital A, affordable rentals. But they can also be for purchase, and that's in the little light blue area. Again, capital AH, affordable housing, is legally designated with rules and standards enforced by a government entity in terms of price and in terms of who qualifies. The second way that policymakers think about addressing this is adding to and preserving the overall supply and diversity of housing types. They're not regulated and not set aside by a government. So this is additional housing that may not be affordable to everyone, but adding to the supply relieves that supply-demand mismatch that we talked about, and also makes it more likely that there's going to be a good fit housing option for a variety of types of households. And so there we're talking about adding to the supply sort of all along those other areas with the blue arrows. So this is sort of market rate housing that's naturally affordable. Some people call it naturally occurring affordable housing, which is the acronym NOAA, which is my son's name, so I kind of like that acronym, naturally occurring affordable housing. Okay, so let's go back to number one, that capital AH, and I'm showing the continuum on the bottom again. How does that work? So these bullet points show you the sort of basic rules of how this works. These are units that are marketed in accordance with these rules called the Westchester County Fair and Affordable Housing Affirmative Marketing Plan. The prices are set so that they're affordable to folks who are who have incomes at up to either 60% for renters or up to 80% for purchasers of the area median income. And I'll explain a little bit more about area median income in a minute. There are very strict rules for how this works. Folks have to apply through a HUD-approved not-for-profit agency that verifies their income and then places people with a lottery. These units often come about as a result of a local government, like Dobbs Ferry, that requires a certain percentage of these affordable, capital AH, affordable housing units to be included in new developments. And that's what's known as inclusionary zoning. So you may hear that term thrown around. That's what is meant by that. And sometimes these buildings are 100% affordable units. Those are usually able to be built most often with the help of special financing that's available for 100% affordable housing buildings and special grants from the government. And again, all of these are monitored by staff at the Westchester County Planning Department. And these are housing units that must remain affordable for 50 years. So a little bit more about this type of affordable housing. Remember I mentioned this 60% or 80% of area median income. So when we talk about area median income, these are figures that are calculated each year by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is the calculation for 2020. And in Dobbs Ferry, we're governed by the area median income for Westchester County. So the red number is the area median income for a 4-person household in Westchester County, and then they sort of calculate down and up starting from that red number. So if you look at the rows going across, the 60% row, again, that would be the top income that would qualify to rent an affordable housing unit like this, depending on their household size. The 80% would be the top income that would be eligible to purchase a co-op or a house at those various family sizes. So when you think about it, these are not super low incomes, really. These are perhaps our teachers, our nurses, DPW workers, all sorts of folks, sort of middle income, lower middle income income levels. And at the bottom, just a couple of quick photos of some buildings in Dobbs Ferry that include affordable housing units because of our inclusionary zoning rules, which I will get into a little bit later. So what does this type of affordable housing look like? Well, it can really look like anything. It can be different kinds. These are just some photos to give you some examples. Ideally, it's housing that is beautiful, designed beautifully, that is designed to reinforce the neighborhood character and fit in with its neighborhood. These are a few examples of buildings that include affordable housing that were taken by rehabilitating or renovating existing buildings. You may recognize on the bottom left, that's the Reader's Digest, the old Reader's Digest building in Chappaqua. The one on the bottom right is in Peekskill. The one on the upper left is in Bedford. Was renovated to include 7 units of affordable housing. The one on the upper right is Vancouver. And just a few more examples of what this type of housing can look like. These are examples of new construction. Again, they can be really any shape or size that we want. We want them to be beautiful. We want them to fit in. The one, just to point out, the one on the upper left happens to be in Yorktown, and those are 1-bedrooms that were built specifically for physically disabled people with incomes of 30 to 60% of area median income. So now, what about the people who don't win the lottery for these units, or whose income is a little too high or too low? Well, studies indicate that only about 20 to 25% of housing that's affordable in the United States comes from these regulated types of housing. So obviously, it's not likely that we're going to solve this problem just with this type of regulated affordable housing. So what else can we do? So that's when we get back to the second part of our 2-prong approach. And this is where we talk about small a. On our committee, we like to talk about small a affordable housing, or housing that's just sort of naturally occurring. In other words, this is housing that's not designated or set aside by a government and restricted to people with certain income levels, but housing that's simply more affordable to a wide range of people. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about this as the missing middle or gentle density. But all of this is sort of trying to capture the idea of strategies to add more housing options into the mix, address that supply shortage we talked about, and make unregulated housing that's just more affordable sort of naturally. So what does this type of housing look like? Again, it can look like almost anything, but the goal is for it to be beautifully designed, to fit in and reinforce the character of the neighborhood where it is. These are just a few examples of new construction, this type of housing. On the upper left is what's known as a stacked triplex. On the right is a side-by-side triplex. Looks like, on the upper right, it looks like a house, but when you look carefully, there's actually 3 housing units in there. Just below that is market rate housing built for seniors, but because of the way it was built, it's much more affordable. So there's lots of different options. On the bottom right is an example of housing built over retail. So the idea here is that prices, again, they're not regulated per se, but they end up being more naturally more affordable because they're using space a little bit more efficiently and adding a little bit of that gentle density that we talked about. Another benefit of this type of housing is that it brings in more property taxes per square foot of land. If you think about if any one of these parcels of land just had a single family home, the amount of property taxes coming in per square foot is much higher when you get a little bit more density involved. And that can help our tax base, obviously, and helps the economic stability of our village. Here are some more examples of the sort of naturally occurring affordable housing. The house on the upper left is a single family house that was turned into 4 units. On the upper right, it's a beautiful home that has an accessory dwelling unit off to the side, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. And again, some more housing options that are naturally affordable. The bottom right happens to be apartments in Dobbs Ferry on Draper Lane. So now let's bring it all back to Dobbs Ferry. In order to get a better handle on this whole topic and to try to find ways to address it in Dobbs Ferry, as Mayor Rosillo mentioned, Deputy Mayor Donna Cassell proposed that the village establish a task force to learn more about this issue and to explore possible strategies to address housing affordability here in Dobbs Ferry. And this is our mission statement. You'll see that one of the most important things that we want to do is hear from the community. And that's really the main reason why we're here tonight. And this is the process that we're starting. Here's a little bit about what we've been doing. Learning as much as we can about this issue. We're talking to what other villages in the area are doing. Working on a potential accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Again, I'll get into that in a little more detail in a second. We also provided input to the Board of Trustees as the village revised its affordable housing code in 2019. That's the inclusionary zoning code that I mentioned. We'll take a look at that in a second. But I want to emphasize again, we are really still at the very beginning of this process. So a little bit about what we have already in Dobbs Ferry. This is what our vision plan says. So it's already in our stated goals as a village that we should provide affordable housing, that we should have a variety of housing types to meet the needs of people at different stages of their lives, different income levels. And if you see, there's just some pictures of some of the housing we already have in Dobbs Ferry. We're actually fortunate. We do have a really nice variety of different housing types. So the question is, how do we preserve that? And how can we expand on that variety? Here is our current inclusionary housing zone that I mentioned, our affordable housing code. This is the current code right now on the books in Dobbs Ferry. And as you'll see, this is just a summary. This is not word for word. But all new developments of at least 5 units must include some affordable housing, those capital AH, regulated affordable housing units. They must stay affordable for 50 years. And it's an important benefit of every new development of 5 units or more in Dobbs Ferry. And this is now in line with the Westchester County Model Ordinance in these regards. Here's a little bit about what we've found that what our neighbors are doing. They're creating committees like ours. They're creating affordable housing action plans, which is something we would like to do as our sort of ultimate goal. And they're adopting something we called accessory dwelling unit ordinances. These are some photos of some examples. I believe these are in Hastings. But what an accessory dwelling unit is, just to give you an idea, it's a little secondary small housing unit that's added onto or sort of carved out of an existing single family home. So it could be taking a garage and making it to a little separate apartment. It's something that would have its own kitchen, its own bathroom, its separate entrance. So it's sort of adding another little small unit of housing, maybe within a home where the folks who live there they're not using all of that space, and they could maybe let their mother-in-law live there or let their kids live there. Sometimes people call these in-law flats, in-law units or granny flats. But it's something that's almost universally recommended in the literature as a quick and relatively easy way to increase the supply of affordable housing in a community like Dobbs Ferry. Hastings and Irvington already have ordinances that allow this, but right now something like this would be illegal in Dobbs Ferry unless we pass an ordinance to allow it. So we're currently looking at that and working on that. So here are what we see as our next steps. As I talked about, we are looking for a few more members. If anyone would like to join us, please let us know. We want to continue this process of talking to the community, engaging with the community, and learning what people think. So this is really just the first step. Again, looking at short-term, like easy things that we can do. And again, our long-term ultimate goal is to have an affordable housing action plan that we can present to the Board of Trustees. So I know this is pretty much the end. I know I've dumped a lot of information on you. I don't expect you to remember all of it, any of it. Hopefully it made a little bit of sense. But I just wanted to remind folks that we have a little website. If you go to the dobbsferry.com and you click on government, you'll then see all the committees and task forces in the village. You can click on the Affordable Housing Task Force. You'll come here. We already have a lot of information up. You can see on the left, we have research that we've collected. We have a link to that Westchester County Housing Needs Assessment. We have all sorts of things. We will put up the recording from tonight from what I've just done. We will put up the slide deck. And we will also be gathering any questions that come up in the breakout rooms. We're going to put together a frequently asked questions document because we just decided we're not going to take time right now to answer your questions, but we will try to put that up on our website. And we will also put together summaries of the notes of what we hear in the breakout rooms. So just keep checking back to our website. Also, there's our email address on the bottom, which you can find on the website. If you have any questions, you want to reach out, you can reach us there. And that's really it from me. Thank you so much for listening. And I think I'm going to hand it back over to Tiffany, who is going to explain the breakout room process so we can hear from everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the whole Dobbs Ferry Affordable Housing Committee for a fantastic presentation. I feel like I might just take you all on a road show. I was watching Rose and I feel like I was going to start texting her saying this needs to go on the road show to others. So really just a really well done. So what I'd like to do now is we are going to go into breakout rooms, but before we go into breakout rooms, what people really know me for is the fact that I have ground rules for participation in all public events. And typically I'm doing this in person. So you can imagine my ground rules for participation, always involve people raising their hands, and I'd have to, maybe I'd have to walk up to someone and slowly pat them on the back to tell them, to wrap it up. But we're on Zoom and I can't do any of that. So we have ground rules to participate in the Zoom room. So first thing is that you are all obviously on mute right now, which is a beautiful thing because you can hear me clearly. But as we begin our participation together, we would appreciate it if one person did speak at a time. So the way we're going to do that is you can use, if you're savvy enough to know where the raise the hand function is of Zoom after all these months of being on Zoom, it's typically under reactions. If you have that little emoji person at the bottom, you can click that and it'll raise the hand in your box. We'll call upon you and we're going to go one at a time. If you have no clue where that raise the hand function is, that's fine. Just literally raise your hand and I will call upon you as well. And I'm going to do the best that I can to get to everyone this evening. We'd like everyone to really be courteous and respectful of others' points of views regarding this. We all live in this community together, but we all look at the issues and the way we want our community to be shaped a little differently. So just to be courteous to one another, maybe be courteous to me as I facilitate and to all of our facilitators. It's tough going back and forth and trying to find everyone on Zoom. Again, just wait to unmute when you're recognized by the facilitator. We really would like everyone to participate. So if I realize people are eating dinner and maybe they are off camera for a little bit, but come back on when you're speaking so we can see you and we can have a conversation. I don't think this is happening. This usually is a ground rule in my own house, but is no personal attacks. Yes, I have ground rules for my family as well. We're going to have people just sort of speaking for themselves, not in response or answering someone's question, or else we won't really be able to have that type of dialogue we want to have. And then honestly, the biggest rule here is let's be creative, be open to new ideas, be open to viewpoints. Let's just think about this. It's new. We are all facing this together. We're all looking at this together. So we just want people to be creative as we move forward. Okay, so that's it. You might hear your own facilitator repeat these ground rules. What's going to happen now is we are going to head into breakout rooms. You will see on your screen, it's going to pop up and ask you to join a breakout room. You need to accept that so that it forces you into the breakout room where you'll be met with one of us in a room. For those that are bilingual, I want to turn it to Mary, who will also explain what to do next. Mary, there you are.
Yes, tenemos un grupo bilingüe, entonces las que se van a unir con nosotros, por favor esperen a que yo les diga al final. No vayan a entrar en ningún otro grupo.
Perfect. So anyone who would like to be in that bilingual room, just do not accept your breakout room. I think Mary expressed that. So don't accept it, stay where you are, and you'll be joined with Mary in that room. So on that note, unless I'm missing something, Jess, are we good to go? Everyone has a breakout room?
Yes, okay. Every time I do this, I feel like fingers crossed it's going to work. Okay. I am opening the breakout room, so just select your room, and again, stay here if you want to be placed in the bilingual room.